Welcome. I was going to say welcome back, but you really haven't been anywhere. So, Chris.
And in fact, Kieran, they look a little, they've been sitting there for kind of a while.
Kind of sleepy?
Yeah, I wonder if I could just have, you guys have put in a monster day today. Have you seen anything good? All right. So before we get to the very last session of the day, could I have everyone stand up? Everyone stand up and take a deep breath. And just let the calming effect of the thought of Metro-style apps wash over you. Okay, Kieran, they're not ready for you. Please have a seat, everyone.
I'm so pleased that you said that, because there's just no way that I'd have got away with it. So it's great to be here. As you can see from the slide, my name is Kieran Mockford, and this is Chris Sells, my illustrious colleague. We are from the developer division, and we have been hard at work working on the tools that we are now going to show you over the next hour. We're going to show you 5 applications. 2 or 3 of them we're going to write from scratch for you using the tools. 2 tools, in fact. Now let me get this right. Microsoft Visual Studio 11 Express Edition for Windows Developer Preview. Henceforth, I will call it VS. And then Microsoft Expression 5 Developer Preview, henceforth I will call that Blend. So
Kieran, this is a developer session. We are going to be showing the tools. You promised me there would be no slides.
There are no slides.
What? That's a slide. It's right there.
Ah. Great plot device. It may look, smell, and taste like a slide.
I have to be honest, I haven't tasted it.
No, don't do that. But feel it. See if it is a slide.
Ooh. Is this a preview version of PowerPoint that we're showing off?
Obviously it responds to touch, because it's all about touch. But, you know, we wanted to inject a little bit of fun as well. So if you reach to your left, Chris, you'll find something else.
I noticed that you seem to have suffered a flesh wound here, Kieran.
It's fine. It's fine. I'll be able to bite your legs off. Don't worry about it.
Good.
Okay. All right. Also, to your left, before we go too far, there is an alternative control mechanism. That is a regular Xbox 360 controller, nothing particularly special, but it does happen to be connected into this Metro-style application using the Xinput API. The Xinput API, the astute amongst you, I can hear it already being said, is not projected using the WinRT API. That's okay. We'll have a look and figure out how the heck that's been done. Now, before I go on and have a look at that, we've got 2 pieces of hardware that we're going to be using today. The first one is a developer laptop, which Chris, my lovely assistant, is currently pointing at. And that is just a regular developer-style laptop, but it does have a capacitive touchscreen, 2 points of touch, which is grand. And we're also going to be using one of the wonderful Windows Developer Preview PCs, which I'm sure that you're really not really worried about receiving yet.
Don't remind them that we're the only thing standing between them and going and getting their tablets.
We are.
Don't mention that.
That's right, we are. All right, let's have a look at VS. Okay, some of the challenges, as you can imagine, in developing and working with full-screen applications is that the full-screen application that, of course, we enjoy being in is Visual Studio. But, of course, we're developing a full-screen application, and you can't have 2 full-screen applications unless you have 2 monitors, which we saw earlier, and that works extremely well for developing applications in the Metro style. I've done quite a bit of that myself, and it works quite well. Alternatively, we'll see another couple of ways in which you can develop Metro-style applications using the tools in the next 54 minutes. But we also got the first of those, the simplest, the most lightweight, and that's called the application thumbnail. Now, what this is a desktop window manager, DWM, projection of our application being projected, scaled into a window inside of Visual Studio. The application is still running, and Chris is manipulating the Xbox controller, and we can see our beautiful selves spinning as we did before. Okay, now this is great. We'll see, as I said, we'll see another couple of ways in which we can debug these applications. This is particularly good for Direct 3D applications, of which this is. This one's written entirely in C++. And you'll notice in the solution I've got the intro, which is our slide, and we've also got a Windows runtime component. You just saw from John and Nilesh how they created a WinRT component to do some image manipulation. We've done exactly the same thing here, except what we've done is wrap up the Xinput API from the DirectX SDK in order to interact with the standard Xbox 360 controller. So let's have a quick look at what it takes to actually do that wrapping. We're not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I just want to point out a couple of things that are new in the C++ language to enable us to describe the surface area and expose that shape out to Windows Runtime Component consumers. So you can see here the controller class. Now this is the one where you actually ask the controller, please give me your state, where you get the thumb pads, the D-pads, the triggers, all of those kinds of things. And all it does is it's a bog standard C++ class definition except for ref and sealed. And it's those ref and sealed combined with the compiler switch that says, hey, I want you to produce a Windows Runtime Component that actually ends up producing the referential entity. So let's just have a quick look at what files are produced. We just had a wonderful demonstration of what the Apex looks like. Now, this is the output directory of this simple controller, the thing that we interface to xInput. And you can see the normal intermediate emissions from the C++ compiler. These won't get packaged into your Apex that you just saw, by the way. Only the actual runtime files will. You can see the DLL. Inside of that is the native code that interfaces to that controller. And then the other really, really important one is the one right at the bottom of the list, the .winmd file. That contains the Windows Runtime metadata description of the API surface area. The file format of that, if you're a managed code developer, will be extremely familiar. It's actually the same file format that we use for describing CLR metadata. It adheres to the CLI specification. So you can actually IL-DASM it, and you can see the surface area shape of the type. Great. So Direct3D is wonderful, and whilst it's great for providing the ultimate flexibility of UI, the ultimate performance, the way that we can actually exploit every single GPU cycle from our machine, very often, as we've seen today, Metro-style applications enjoy a more structured UI. So our user is a little bit more familiar with what they can expect.
And in fact, Jensen spent a lovely time showing us exactly the green lines with everything, we just live our lives to make Jensen happy. That's what we do here.
Chris and I have been very, very familiar over the last few months with red lines.
Yes.
Being hardcore sort of dev types, we've never exposed to designers and people who say you need to move that by 12 pixels. And like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so now we have a wonderful way in which we can describe structured UI. We've seen that we have a new XAML stack that's based entirely on DirectX. So let's create a new project and see whether we can use some of that. Now we're using, as I said earlier, we're using the Express edition of Visual Studio. Chris is going to bring up the new project dialog. We've already seen this a few times. Because this is the Express edition of Visual Studio, the Metro style, for Windows 8, the Metro style applications dominate the new project dialog. A couple that I'd like to point out, the DirectX application that you're seeing there, that was the original basis of our slide. Also inside of C#, and the WinRT component DLL, thank you, Chris, was the basis of our simple controller project. In C#, you can see that we've also got unit testing libraries, so we fully support unit testing in this version of Visual Studio for Metro-style applications.
That's new in Express, isn't it?
It certainly is, Chris, yes.
I think they know it, too.
Yeah, right. It's a fundamental part of development, right? Okay. Now, the other application types that we've got here you've seen already. We're going to start with the one that Jensen showed us to great effect, the grid. So we're going to create a grid-based C# application, the grid being the richest, the most fully functional, supporting all of the view states. We need a topic for our data feed. We're actually going to go out to the live internet and hopefully get some great, up-to-date, vibrant, exciting data.
Really? On what topic specifically would you like us to build an app around, Kieran?
Well, it turns out that I have a passion for retro computing, where I quite enjoy playing around with old computers.
Really? Passion, not obsession?
No.
Okay.
I only have 17. That's fine. Let's create a Metro-style modern application for looking at retro computing.
So you're talking about like a retro Metro app in this case?
Fine. Yeah.
Fabulous.
All right. Yeah.
We went a long way for that joke, folks.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So what you're seeing straight away in front of you is the designer that we have, the XAML designer inside of Visual Studio. Nothing particularly novel there. Before we have a look at the XAML designer in a little bit more detail, let's go ahead and run this app and see what it looks like. You've seen this particular you've seen this particular template in slide form, but this is the actual running application. And Chris, feel free to, swipe. We've got the little presentation ghost switched on for touch so that you can get an idea of where it is that Chris is touching. Obviously, we've got the great fluid fluid UI going on there. We can go into a group, which is this view. On the left-hand side, this is the group title, and then the items are on the right. If we then go into the actual detail, then we've got yards and yards of Latin, which we'll have a look at later in the template, is actually standard data that's been populated in there so that all the design surfaces and everything can render nicely. It also supports the snap views that Jensen showed. So let's go ahead and get an application in to join us. Let's bring the weather. This is I kind of like the weather. I wrote the original version of this app, the one that was shown at the All Things D conference, and then Pranay and his team from our interns took it and made it. They were very polite about my code, but they took it and made it into something, which is far more fully featured. Anyway, let's bring our application back in and then dock the weather application next to it. Now, because we've got flexible space in this application to the right-hand side, it automatically reconfigures itself. If we expand the weather app to go to the full position, we'll see that our app has now reconfigured itself into a different configuration. The data is still the same. It's still coming. It's still yards and yards of Latin, but it is now fully functional.
And Kieran, this comes out of the box with the templates. We wrote no code, and this works across all of the languages that we support.
All of the languages that we support. C#, VB, C++, JavaScript. Great. Let's get some data that's not quite so old.
Yeah, the Latin maybe is a little older than you had in mind.
Okay, here's the designer that I mentioned earlier. Now, this designer, XAML designer inside of Visual Studio, as I mentioned, is not shouldn't be too much of a surprise. But this designer is both new and not so new at the same time. It is the Blend designer that we've actually integrated inside of Visual Studio. You'll recognize it by the eyes on the Document Explorer. So there we can hide elements on our design surface, so we can get to things that are kind of behind. Very, very powerful. You'll also recognize it by the Properties window, very characteristically Blend. There, if you just click on the title, Retro Metro, you'll see that we get the text is indeed set to Retro Metro. Let's go ahead and change that title. We can just reset that from its data binding state, and Chris, be creative. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Just before we move on too far, there's one particular control. Everybody's familiar with XAML. It's kind of, established now. But there's one particular control that is new for Metro-style applications, and that's the control that handles that wonderful grid view that the Start screen uses and that we've seen in a whole host of the other applications. This is the XAML instantiation of that control. It's called the grid view, and it supports data binding. You can see the item source attribute being set there. That's reaching into our template, grabbing that templated data. It also supports the item template, and there is elsewhere in this XAML file, there's the description of how those individual tiles should look with the image and the text and exactly how they should be laid out. We are going to keep the item template the way it is, but we're going to produce some new data. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring up the sample data source. Now, the constructor of this sample data source is almost self-aware in the amount of code that it has in it, but most of it's just duplicated. So we can just delete all of that template data. We'll keep the group collections instantiation, and you can see all of the Latin has been...
This is all of Latin, isn't it? That's a whole lot of Latin.
Oh, there we go. All right. Now, because there's what we wanted to show you primarily in this talk is how the tools are going to help you develop these Metro-style applications rather than our leet typing skills, which we do have leet typing skills. But what I'd like you to do, Chris, is just bring in the populate method. Now, what the populate method is doing, it's going against the Bing image search API, just the standard public Bing image search API, which you can go and sign up for and then integrate into your application. You can see that it's a very, very straightforward HTTP GET-based API, and it just takes URL parameters. One of the URL parameters is an app ID, which is the little squiggle that you're getting there. Now, what you need to do is you need to go sign up with Bing and get an app ID. I've already done that, and on the desktop...
So I should just open this file that you're about to point me to?
Yeah, no, thank you. I'll get into trouble.
Okay.
I don't want to broadcast my key. So we'll just add that to that file, and then that should complete that. There we go. Okay. So now we've reached out to Bing, and we've got some data. What we actually do is to make the call. So let's go to our app.xaml.cs, and you'll find a show group collection. There we go. And in the show group collection, we'll find a block where we're just instantiating the sample data class with all the template data, and that's it. Now, what we want to do now is call the populate method with a query string that we're going to send to Bing.
So this query string should represent the computers that you are familiar with, where you started your programming career.
Let's do that. So, I thought you were my friend. Baggage?
Oh, the baggage machine, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think I saw one of those at the airport.
I know, I saw you at the airport on the way in. That's,
No. Let's be a little bit more recent than that. Say Acorn BBC Model B.
Being from the Model B, the BBC, the British rock, this is a television, right, that we're talking about?
No, it plugs into a television.
I see.
Okay. Now, in all seriousness, this machine was designed by the people who went on to design the ARM processor, so it's got pretty good heritage. All right, let's go ahead and debug. So the breakpoint, let's F5 and see what it is that we've got. Great. Let's step in. Okay, so we can step here. The debugger is fine. We'll step over the response. We'll have a look at the results. For the results, we've just got a little bit of we're just parsing the results into an X document. If we use the XML viewer, it's not particularly important what's being displayed on the screen. This is the standard Bing image result schema. The two pieces of data that we're particularly interested in are the title of the image and the media URL, which is actually appointed directly to the image. And the X link, the link that's immediately following the code, if we can go ahead and close that one now, the link that you can see immediately following that is reaching into that XML document and selecting out those two items and populating them into an enumeration of anonymous objects, which we will use a little later on.
Great.
Now, I'm getting a bit of a vibe from Chris, and of course from everybody here, that this is a completely synchronous API call. And this is one of those occasions where I can see Jensen peeping around a corner and scowling, and fast and fluid and synchronous.
You don't even have to see him. You can feel it. You can.
So fast and fluid and synchronous don't really go together. We've already seen some of the keywords that we can use inside of C# to solve that problem for us. Let's use them again now. First off, let's fix this API call.
So that's all I have to do, right? I just pick get async and I'm all done.
Not quite.
Okay.
Get async results in a continuation, which we then have to refactor our code into a callback, blah, 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 except if we're using C# 4.5, where we can just use async and await. First thing that we need to do is change the signature of this method. We'll change it to have an async specifier and that it should return a task. The task is implemented by the task parallel libraries inside of the CLR, and welcome TPL team. And by convention, a strongly suggested convention, we have async as a suffix name on the end of it.
And so that's what the little green squiggly is for?
No. That green squiggly is saying, whilst I have now marked this method as being a task rather than a traditional method, I'm not actually awaiting anything. So what I need to do is await the response from the getAsync. So now what we've done is we've made this code. It's still linear. It's still how one would normally think. First I do the first line, then the second, then the third. But now it can operate in an asynchronous way. And we'll have a look in a second at what that actually means. There's a couple more things that we need to do. We need to make the call site of this method understand that we're calling something that's async. So here we need to await that response, fix the name, of course, await that response, and we need an async specifier on this method as well. Great. Let's debug again. Step in. Okay. Now, this is the asynchronous call. The easiest way for me to describe what's actually going to happen when we step over this call is to enlist the help of one of the debugging windows inside of Visual Studio. Normally not in the Visual Studio Express version, is the Parallel Stacks window. The Parallel Stacks window gives you a view of all of the threads that are running inside of your application and the stacks that are actually part of those, that are currently on those threads. And we can navigate up and down the call stack without any problem. If we hover over the title of the thread, we can see things like the thread ID, 804. Great. Now what I want to do is step over this asynchronous call. Okay. Now what actually happened there? Two things happened. The first thing that happened was our Metro-style application immediately came back to the front and then immediately dismissed itself again back as the debugger took control. And the other thing that's far more obvious is that the Parallel Stacks window now has a new entry. So what's happened is thread 1, the 804 ID, is now the one with the bolded entry. We're now back on the thread that we were on. But the other thread is the one that handled the asynchronous call. So what happened was the compiler and the runtime orchestrated effectively the carving of our method in half around the await call. The first half of the method was executed. Then we returned out to the main, sorry Alesh, message pump of the application. And then when the actual response came back in from async, then we got called back and we actually complete the method. The great thing about this, of course, is that we can write linear code in the way that we're used to, but still get that great asynchronous behavior.
And we get the tools to show it.
Exactly. And the tools to help mere mortals such as myself write multi-threaded code. Okay, let's see what we've got to do next. Let's get this data and get it populated.
Great.
So out again in the toolbox, there's a couple of methods, adding items and collections. These are just very, very straightforward code, taking some parameters and populating them into this same internal data structures as the sample data was originally using. So Chris is just going ahead. He first adds the collection. The collection inside of the template represents the groups that you saw in Jensen's talk, the grouped sections inside of the start screen. So we've just got one group in this instance, titled the name of the query, and the image that's going to represent that group will just be the first result in the list. Okay, so we'll then we'll iterate over the results and add those images in as well. Okay, I think we're good to run. And there we go.
Kieran, look at all those old computers. You must be in heaven right now.
Would you like to hear some more about that one?
No, not really, no.
Okay, so what we've seen is we've seen the richest of all of the templates that we have inside of VS Express, C# and XAML. I pointed out the new grid view control, which is driving this user experience that you can see here. We've gone out to the Bing Search API and just done a simple, straightforward query for my old computer obsession, got it bound up into the user interface, and we didn't have to write, well, not really very much code. The template is doing everything. The navigation is still exactly the same. It's fully supported of everything that you saw Jensen do today. Docking, snapping, all of the rest of that will still work, including a portrait view that we'll have a look at a little bit later on.
That's great.
All right, Chris?
Is that all we can do with our tools?
Well, we've seen C++, we've seen C#, we've seen XAML, we've seen Direct3D.
Yeah, I think there's another one. And in fact, I think I'll talk about this other one. What do you think? All right. So, as Kieran mentioned, we've seen a lot of languages during the day, and we've seen a lot of languages during this talk, but as it turns out, we have a great deal of tool support for a whole nother language, JavaScript and HTML. And let me just, by applause, how many JavaScript, HTML programmers do we have in the audience? Okay, great. That's great. Good. So, you should like this then. So, Kieran, what I'd really like to do is, we have seen that when we go to the new project dialog, that we have the same set of templates for all these languages. And so far, we've looked at a bunch of these templates. Let's look at the grid version of the JavaScript. And you can go ahead and call that whatever you like. Great. Now, as you might imagine, it would be very easy for me at this point to say, and hey, Kieran, let's run this and see it work right here on the local machine, but we've already seen that. Let me just cut to the chase. It works and acts just like the C# one, so that's not very exciting. Let's do something slightly more exciting. We have, as it turns out, that lovely and vivacious tablet PC. And if we could have a split screen, please, so we could see both machines at the same time. Number 44. There we go. That's the one we want. Great. So on the sides, you will see our developer machine. And in the middle, you'll see the desktop of the Samsung tablet, which all of you will get as soon as we shut up. Yes, it's there, live. Great. So, Kieran, what if I want to use, let's say that my tablet, this is a very capable tablet, but let's say that my tablet was not beefy, like it was a smaller tablet, right? That we also want to support, we also want to target, but we would like to debug our apps on that machine. So what we really want to do is set up a remote debugging session. So what Kieran has done is he's brought up the configuration for remote debugging. He just said, I want to debug on the remote machine instead of the local machine. And he's picked this box on the network. Now, right now, Kieran, we are wired for these two computers, wired network for both of them. Is that necessary?
No, it's not necessary, but in an environment where there's lots of 2.4 gigahertz going on.
Yes, we do have a lot of people with their laptops and their smartphones, so we've chosen to be wired, but it works just fine wireless. In fact, it's kind of magic, right? To just have, you're debugging your app as it's wireless. It's kind of fun. But we've got it wired. So Kieran, at this point, you've got it configured, so go ahead and F5. And there we go. Notice we're doing remote debugging. And in fact, Kieran, if you will go ahead and just set a breakpoint so that we can see that, in fact, we are running the debugger live against this app. Go ahead and open up default.js and find the navigated event. So as we go from page to page, right? Notice. And there we are in the breakpoint in the debugger. And notice we have the tools that you'd expect. We've got data tips, we've got the call stack, we've got the locals, we've got the immediate window. We have the debugging tools that you expect from your development environment right here for JavaScript and HTML. Okay? But wait, there's more. Because not only do we have the ones out of the box that you expect, but we have some special ones too. Kieran, would you bring up the DOM Explorer for me, please? Ooh, there it is. And so that's the HTML that describes where we are. And notice as Kieran clicks around that the corresponding set of elements are highlighted on the remote machine. And Kieran has navigated, which is not a trivial amount of HTML, and he's found himself to the title. But Kieran, what if you wanted an easier way to do it? What happens if you select in the DOM Explorer the Select Element button, and now reach out with one finger and select the element that you would like, and notice that the DOM Explorer navigates directly to that element. Okay? And Kieran, is this just for looking around, or is this live? Can we make changes to this data? Let's find out. So Kieran. Ooh, See? We can make it ugly on demand. That's awesome. Perfect. Okay, great. We could watch you do this all day. But we've got some other things to show. One of the things we'd like to show, Kieran, let's bring it back to the local machine. Now, one of the things that we talked about, in fact, Jensen spent a bunch of time talking about it. Stephen in his keynote spent a bunch of time talking about it. Remember, we talked a lot about the contracts and how important those contracts were. The picker, the share, the search, right? And we've seen various implementations of those. But as it turns out, we've got built-in support in the tools, so if you right-click and say Add New Item, we have a number of pages that you can drop into your HTML app. And Kieran, if you could filter this by the contracts, notice that we've got the picker, the share, and the search contract results page built in as items. Kieran, let's do, which one do you feel like doing?
I think search we've seen.
Let's do search. I like to keep Kieran involved.
So I don't go to sleep.
Great. So now we have the HTML and the JavaScript and the CSS, and we've got this item template pre-populated with data. So that means that once we hook it up, we should be able to see it running live on that same Latin data that you so love. So let's go ahead and drop that in. Perfect. Now if we run it, dun, 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 dun. Okay, great. So now let's go ahead and do search. And Kieran, if you could enter your favorite Latin word here, lorem. I'm a big fan of that one myself. Notice the search results show up and all of that data is highlighted. Now, of course, you should really change the data before you ship the app. I'm just saying. But when you do, you got that same UI, you've got that same search functionality built in. Do we have to be running it from the app for the search functionality to work?
No, we can do it from the start screen as well.
And in fact, I noticed earlier that when we were implementing the search contract, we had to go to the manifest designer and update our capabilities to say search was involved. But how come it worked out of the box with this one?
So initially we were debugging, and we had the interactive search. So
right.
We were running the interactive app. Now we've gone back to the start screen, where we'll actually get a full activation with the search terms, and then our app will go straight to the search results.
And when we added the item template, it went in and added those items to the manifest for us directly. We didn't have to do a thing to make that work. That's great. So that's the search contract. That's pretty cool. As I say, we've got support for all three of those contracts that we've heard are so important today. Great. Now, Kieran, we've seen this app run on the local machine now. We just saw it. We saw it run on a remote machine. But what if, as it turns out, see, notice we have a large number of machines on the stage.
We could debug on every one.
What if I don't own every one of those machines, which I think is a crime, and I'd like to talk to the OEM partners afterwards to make sure that doesn't happen. But if I don't own every single possible machine, I would still like to make sure that my app works when it runs on those machines. So we have another way to debug called the simulator. So what Kieran has done is he's chosen to debug under the simulator, and if he runs the exact same app, we will notice that, look, it's got little curved edges. It looks just like a device. Okay? And notice that it is showing a large number of items, both in the start screen and in the grid view. And the reason, Kieran, if you could zoom in on our resolution menu there, the reason is because the simulator lets you choose how many pixels you want and how big you want that screen to go. So what we did is we started at the big one, right? The monster, right? Imagine a 27-inch TV on your desktop. We want to show as much information as possible in a, what's that?
Is this a VM?
Is this a VM? Why? Oh, you're asking how do we implement, how have we implemented the simulator, Kieran? Actually, it turns out Kieran implemented the prototype of the simulator, so he's very proud of it. So tell us, Kieran, how did you implement the simulator?
Can get you. Okay. What we've done is we've actually made use of our terminal server technology. This is doing a remote desktop to ourselves. And normally it's not a fruitful thing to have a conversation with yourself. But in this case, what we're able to do is we're able to fool the system into saying, no, this is the actual resolution that I have. Even this is the DPI that I have. And yes, it's being scaled, so the pixels are being scaled, as you can probably see. There's certainly not the full DPI that a device of this capability would actually have. But it does allow us, as a developer, to test our applications in all of the configurations that we have. So full size, the resolution, and the DPI.
Great. And so, He did an excellent job, didn't we? We're all very proud of him back at Microsoft, yes. So, as I was saying, we were showing, remember Jensen talked all about that, you've got a big screen, you want to show more items. You've got a small screen, you want to show fewer items. So Kieran, what happens if we go all the way to the other end of that spectrum? Notice that we're reconnecting, we're reconfiguring, and we're rerunning the app, and notice it is properly scaled for a much smaller simulated screen. And Kieran, there's other things we can do with this too.
Right. We can throw our application into portrait mode.
We absolutely can. There we go. Oh, and I notice you're using the mouse, but what if we wanted to use touch? Could we do that? Fabulous. And now what if we happen to be developing on a machine that wasn't touch enabled, but we wanted to make sure touch worked just fine?
We have touch emulation in the simulator as well.
So we can go ahead and click on the little finger, and now when we click the mouse, it is in fact sending and simulating touch events. And in fact, we've got pinch and rotate, multi-point as well. So we've got a large amount. So Kieran, I think we've shown the simulator. In fact, we've shown a number of tools here. We've shown the templates for JavaScript. We've shown the search contract and the other contracts available. We've shown debugging remotely. We've shown the simulator. We have shown a large number. Is that all?
Well, not quite. We've also shown a whole load of code that's created in the template.
We have been leaning, I feel a little bad that we've been leaning on the templates. So, why don't we try this again? Why don't we say, you know what, Kieran, you got to build your app. That was your passion. I have a passion as well. I'm a big fan of Channel 9, and specifically, I'm a big fan of those wacky coding for fun guys. Who knows what I'm talking about? Yeah. The other day, they had a Kinect that was running like a motorized easy chair. I totally want one. So, what I would like to do is reach over to the Channel 9 data source and pull that down. Kieran, let's build an app, but instead of starting from the grid, let's show how easy it is to get there from blank. Now, we've already seen what we get with blank. We saw that with Alesh and John. Now, it turns out we're going to use some more of the libraries, so Kieran's going to pull those in. Great. Now, let's pull in a little bit of starter HTML. And what this is going to give us is a header with a back button and a title. That's great. And let's get a little bit of starter CSS. Great. And so what Kieran's going to do is he's going to drop in a little bit of CSS. And this is just one CSS selector per ID of item that we just added in our HTML. And a few of them really like to take up the entire space. So we're going to set that up. Great. And so, is that it? Let's run it. Let's see what we have. Okay. Jensen would not be happy with this app. No, we do have the right elements, right? But they are not aligned properly. Now we put in CSS. What more do we need?
Yeah, we need more help.
We do. And in fact, we could, if we wanted, use the 101 key text wizard that comes with every copy of Visual Studio, or we could right-click on our project and say, open in Expression Blend, which is another tool that we're very proud of at Microsoft.
Very proud.
Right. You've seen that Expression Blend allows you to bring in your HTML and JavaScript app. It shares all the same files. And so what we're going to do, remember we mentioned earlier today that we have a new CSS3 grid element that we've implemented in IE10. And so it's really good at layout. So what Kieran's going to do is he's going to do a little configuration in Blend where he sets up two grids. The outer grid is going to have two sections. It's going to have a space for the header, and it's going to have a space for our content. Okay? Then the inner grid is going to be across the top, and it's going to separate the back button from the title. And once he gets the grid set up, we should have a better layout. Let's see how we're doing. So this is the beauty of watching Kieran do this, is every time he touches this tool, the app gets a little better. There we go. So Jensen would be proud of this.
He would be happier.
Great. So now what happens if we go back to Visual Studio? Oh, we have a notification that Visual Studio has noticed the blend goodness. So let's bring that in. And notice, again, as I mentioned, the grid settings that we got by bringing in expression. Great, let's run it. Okay, that's good. Now, we really need some content. Okay? Now, to bring in our content, we're going to go to the third file that we get out of the box, which is where we're going to put our code, default.js. And notice here that we're using some of the best practices of JavaScript. We've got our anonymous self-executing function here so that we don't leak into the global namespace unnecessarily. We're using useStrict, which is now new in IE 10 to make sure we catch coding errors. And we've got a little event handler, right? This is code that we need for initialization. And as it turns out, we're out of the box, the template says, do you care about tile activation or file-based activation or notifications? We don't need that, Kieran, so let's go ahead and take that code out. And now if you would drop in a little bit of the code we do want, here we're using XHR from WinJS. WinJS is a little set of helpers that we have provided to give you an optimized experience, is a good way to say it, to bring the WinRT along with the styles and the IE10 features together in a consistent way for JavaScript programmers, the way they would expect. And one of the wrapper functions we have provided is called XHR, which stands for XML HTTP request. And that's the basic function we use. We reach out to the internet and pull data. We've got the RSS feed. Would you like to show us what's in the RSS feed, Kieran? Great. This is that cool coding for fun data that we would like to pull into our application. Okay. Now, the way we do that, remember Alesh talked about how things were asynchronous in the WinRT, and in JavaScript, that means promises. And with promises, we have a function that is called when we have successfully completed accessing the data. So, Kieran, let's go ahead and drop in a little code that will take our successful return of the data and pull the items out of it. And Kieran, what does this code do?
This code is very, very straightforward. It's completely standard JavaScript. What we get from the response is the normal response that you'd get back from an XML HTTP request. We're reaching into that response XML and just using the XML parser with a little bit of XPath to go in and weed out the particular pieces of information that we want. In this instance, we want the title of the article, we want the thumbnail image of the article, and we want the actual content, which just conveniently happens to be published in HTML.
Perfect. So now now that we have the data, we need a place to put it. So let's go back to our default.html. And remember, Alesh and Jensen have both talked about the large number of controls. And in fact, earlier in this talk, in XAML, we saw the grid view control. That exact same control is named the list view control in HTML. So we're going to bring in the list view control, which we have implemented in JavaScript in WinJS. And that's a model. If you want to build your own controls in JavaScript, you can absolutely see the source code and see how that works. Great. Now what we're going to do is provide a little styling, and we're going to do two things. We're going to say, Mr. List View, we would like you to take up 100% of the area available to show all of the content we're about to give you. And for each item in the list view, we would like you to be, how big do you want it to be, Kieran?
I'm really not completely sure, so let's just go with 150.
Great. 150 by 150. Fabulous.
We'll find out when we're wrong.
So the only other thing we have to do at this point is actually bring the data and the list view together. So let's go ahead and bring a tiny little bit more code in. So our little, we have a little function in WinJS called process all. And what that does is it goes and it pulls in all of the controls that need creating and associates them with the HTML elements that they're defined with. Again, that is an asynchronous function, so we're going to get a promise. And when that finishes successfully, we're going to reach over and we're going to grab the JavaScript control associated with our list box, and we're going to set some new options. And we're going to set two new options. One, the most important, is the data source that says, here's the list of the data we just pulled in from that RSS feed. And the second is, we're going to turn off selection, which happens to be the default for our list view. And Kieran, at this point, we should have a beautiful functioning app.
Uh-oh.
Well, we should have at least a functioning app at this point.
We forgot something.
Well, see, the beauty of this is, Kieran, I have injected a fault into the program for just such an occasion. So that we had an opportunity to bring up this dialogue again and say, remember capabilities. And in our case, we happen to be using some caching on stage to make sure that our data is responsive for our demo. So we just have to turn on the home networking. So once we have that capability, bang. Mm-hmm. Ooh. Look, isn't it pretty? It is 150 by 150, you can tell. Yeah, maybe Jensen wouldn't be so happy with that. Okay, Kieran.
Need some more HTML, Chris.
Yes, we do. So here's the problem. The problem is the list view is doing the best it can. It's got a JavaScript array of objects, and it is walking down that list, and it is displaying it the best way it knows how. The problem is we haven't really told it how to display the items. And so to tell it, we need a little bit of template code. Remember, Alesh and John showed off templates. And the idea of templates is it's just a set of HTML that we would like to be repeated, one per data item. And we mark it as a template with the data when control attribute, winjs.binding.template. And then what we do is we fill in each of the variables. Remember, we have 2 pieces of data per item, the URL to the image, which we will set as the source property on the image tag, and the title of the article, which we will set as the inner text of our div. So the list view should be able to do much, much better. We do have one thing to do, though. We have to tell the list view about how to render our items. So we have another property called item renderer, which we hand it the item template. Great. Now that should do it. Tell me that's going to do it, Kieran. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's a little better. I still don't think Jensen's going to be happy with that.
I think we need help again.
All right. Let's bring in the big guns. Let's pull up Expression Blend. Now, as it turns out, Expression Blend is exceedingly good at these kinds of things because it has one very important feature in it. Not only does it parse the HTML and the CSS, but it actually executes the live running JavaScript in your app. That means it's doing a live query against the data. So that's why you're seeing the results of our live query. And what that means then is Kieran can set up a selector on the left-hand side that says, hey, I would like to see all of the items in my list view, and I would like to change some of the properties. Notice he's increasing the width from 150 by 150 to 250 by 250. Now the list view does a little caching, so we have a little refresh button. Ooh, that's better. Okay, we're getting there. Now what are you typing now, Kieran?
I'm just putting in a couple of more CSS selectors that Blend will create classes for that allow us to go in and fine-tune those details so that we've got exactly as we want it. First, I need a list item template. Now, the list item template is the class that we had on our template when we initially pasted it in. And then, underneath the list item template, I also want the actual image. And you'll see that Blend has selected all of the images. If I select the list item template, you'll get the green outlines on all of the elements that are styled using that class. And if I select the image, then I'll get to select those. Now, if I move along here, we'll find one of the images that's really hanging out.
Yeah, so Kieran, I mean, I like all the, should we just throw that out of the data set and ignore that one, or is there something we can do?
We can do something here. Now, what I added was a class-based CSS selector. So Blend knows that this is a class-based CSS selector, and it allows me to interact with the design surface with just one of those instances of the class, but that size change will get reflected across the whole design surface.
Okay, that's not too bad.
I can then go in and make the final changes that I need to. I also know that we've got some margining issues here. We've got kind of a bit of an overrun on some
Oh,
text.
right. Yes, the little text.
That I can just fix with a few margins. I'll just have an 8-pixel margin around all of those.
Now, you've got a fancy design tool here, but are we doing anything proprietary, or is this just regular standard HTML and CSS that we're generating?
This is regular and standard HTML
Correct.
and CSS.
So we just have a really great tool.
We've got a really great tool.
Okay.
Okay, that's pretty much where we are, Chris. Wait a minute. There's one thing missing.
Oh, and what's that?
Another one of those red lines.
Oh, we do have one problem. Remember, Jensen talked about this actually, where he said we do want to be able to pan all the way through our set of images, but that left set of padding there isn't quite what we want. So what Kieran is doing is he's going to select, build a selector that will select the very first one, and then he's going to set the Windows UX style guidelines margin for that. Okay, so that's pretty good. So let's go back to Visual Studio and see if it likes our goodness. It sees the goodness. Let's execute the app. Ooh, Okay, well, we have a couple of problems now, Kieran. Now, and luckily we're in Visual Studio, where I think is a good tool to fix them, because we have some behavior problems. Notice when Kieran clicks on an article, it doesn't actually show the article, which would be a handy thing to do in a reader application. And also notice that the back button had no effect. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our HTML, and we're going to provide a place for the content to be. And we're going to call this the article content. Great. Wonderful. And now what we're going to do is we have a little can function that is going to be invoked whenever we click on one of those items in the list view. Okay? And Kieran, what does this function do?
Very straightforward. All we're doing is reaching into the array that we used to populate the list view in the first place. When the invite and invoked event fires, it will send us the index number into that array so that we know which article was actually clicked on or touched on by the user. We're then using set inner HTML unsafe, which basically means, okay, I know as this app author, I'm an app author, remember, not a web page author, so this is okay, that I'm okay with some HTML content that's come from the web, and I'm going to take that HTML content and put it into the div placeholder that we just created.
And so in this case, we're explicitly trusting that the Coding for Fun guys are going to give us HTML, but by default, we get, if we try to put HTML with random things in it like script or things like that, that might hurt our user experience, we automatically, by default, we reject it. It's a runtime exception, and the developer then has to fix it. And we have other functions too, not just trust, which is what we're doing here, but we can actually say, you know what, clean out all of that stuff that is unsafe and just take the safe HTML. And that's a good way to go too.
So this is a really safe way of getting HTML content from the web. In the first instance, if you do it accidentally, the platform looks after you. In this instance, I know what I'm doing, I trust the source, the platform supports it. Great, and then we're just switching those two things around. So I'm hiding the list by setting the display style property from CSS to none, so it will disappear. And then the article content, I will clear the display property so that it comes to the...
So that's what happens when we click on an item. Now we do have to tell the list view, hey, here's what to do when we click on an item.
Oh yeah, yep. And let's do that here. So inside of our set options, we've also gotten on item clicked. On item invoked.
And then it's the item invoked method. Perfect. Now, we've done that, we have to do the inverse, which is we have to implement the back button.
All right.
So let's go ahead and put that in here. And we've got a little bit of implementation there. And all we're doing here is when the back button is clicked, we're doing the opposite of what we did before. We're hiding the content and we're showing the list view. So we should have a functioning app at this point, Kieran. Would you say so?
We should do.
Ooh. There we go. There's our article content. Back works. Okay. Well, so it's functioning. It has the behavior.
Jensen.
But remember what what Jensen said. Jensen was so eloquent to say.
He had a colorful word to describe.
Yes, he did. What he said was, if you use animations as you transition your content, then what you get is fast and fluid. And then if you don't use those animations, it's less than fast and fluid. He had a different word that I quite liked. Yes. So, as he mentioned, we have an animation library built right in. So what Kieran's going to do is bring in animation.transition content, and this is one of the many ways you can animate content. And what we're going to say is, hey, we would like to transition this article content into view. And we want to do the exact opposite when we press the back button. Great. So that should already be. Ooh, that is better. That is nicer.
But I can't read this article.
Yeah, the article itself is pretty unreadable. Okay, so let's go back to Blend. I think we need some more Blend help.
I think we do.
Right? Blend is all excited about our new implementation. Now we have another problem here, which is by default, Blend is showing the home page of our app. But we don't want to style the home page. That's already the way we want it. What we want is to be able to work our way into the app a little bit and style it once we get to a point. And so for that express purpose, we have a giant switch in Blend that says interactive mode. And interactive mode lets us work with the app. And instead of when clicking on an element brings it up in the property browser and in the live DOM, clicking on the element actually does whatever the navigation is for that element. So what we can do is we can, inside of Blend, click around until we get to the content we want, and then turn off the giant switch, drop out of interactive mode. Now we're back in design mode. So now what we can do is we can style while we're here. So, well, the first thing we want to do, of course, is we want to make sure that the article stays inside of the content area. Perfect.
Great. But we're missing that.
Oh, that's right. We do have to have the padding on the left, the 120 pixels of padding. So let's do that. Oh, but we have another problem, which is now we've just made the... Can we solve that problem?
We can. So Blend supports not only putting in regular values, but it also supports custom expressions in the same way as it does for XAML. So here I need to type in a custom expression, and I need to say standard CSS custom expression, calculate 100%, and then minus the 120 pixels that I just added to the left.
And again, that's just standard CSS. It just happens to be exposed in the tool.
Right.
So Kieran, there was this really cool feature in the template where content was like arranged in columns and stuff. Can we do that?
We can. And, CSS comes to our rescue once again.
Oh, great.
So CSS supports multi-column in its latest incarnation. So here I've got the multi-column panel expanded, and I can just say, well, I'd like my columns to be 480 pixels wide, please. Just watch the design surface, and it's reconfigured the article to be multiple column. And now I don't have quite enough gap between them, so I can set that to 80 pixels. And that's reconfigured that.
Ooh, it's getting better and better.
Now, of course, the article is actually wider than the 100% of the screen that we've got. So we need to enable some scrolling there.
Oh, right. We want to make sure that we can actually see all the content. And we can do that by, again, this is a CSS property. In this case, it happens to be the overflow behavior. So we'll set that. And notice we have the scroll bar. Fabulous. Now we have another problem I noticed, which is in that second column, we've got some code.
Yeah.
And it's not really, it's kind of hanging off the edge, and you can't really tell it's code. And of course, it being code, it's the most important part.
All right.
So what we'd really love to do is to be able to style that code specifically. So what Kieran has done is he just built a selector that selects just the bits of code in that article. And now, because we have that selector, we can go and set styles based on that code. And so I'm thinking, what do you think, like a background color?
That should certainly help. It was pretty handy that those Coding for Fun guys were wise and used the pre-tag for their code. Okay, so now we can just pick a background color.
Ooh.
That'll do.
No, not. Oh, that's the wrong color. Gray.
Oh. Okay. What do we want to use, the eyedropper or something instead?
Oh yeah. See, that makes all the difference. You can tell.
And we've got the overhang problem again as well.
Yeah, we do have the overhang, so we need scroll bars here. Now, Kieran, I have to ask, have we just reached into a specific article and styled it? Are we going to have to do this for each one of the articles?
No. CSS, class-based.
Ah, so that means right now, if we run it...
Let's run it.
We pick an article. Ooh, there's our styling. Ooh, and it's all touchy. Ooh, there's some more code. Oh, pick another article.
There's that crazy chair.
So, oh, I love that chair. So that's pretty good. Wouldn't you say, Kieran?
I'm sorry, no.
I'm sorry, you're reading the articles. What did I tell you about that? Okay. So what did we see? We saw, starting from scratch, building a Windows 8 UX guidelines Metro-style app in JavaScript and HTML using both Visual Studio for the things that it was really good at, all the coding, and the debugging, and for using Blend for the things that it was really good at, the styling and the real-time styling. That was pretty cool.
Great. Okay, we have another slide that isn't really a slide, but it does allow me to sum up if I have enough time before the slide is completely obscured. We saw a C++ Direct3D application using a Windows runtime component that we built to interface with the X-Input API that we use the Xbox controller to spin our beautiful selves. Those models were actually built and tooled with a version of Visual Studio that you're going to hear more about in sessions that are coming up in this week. Some very cool stuff in the 3D graphics area. We saw C#, and we unfortunately didn't get time, but we have built a VB version of the C# application that we showed. It's almost identical, apart from two significant differences in that we use capital A's for the await and the async keywords. Other than that, it's the same.
And they can come to the booth and they can see that code.
They can indeed, no problem at all. They can even have it if they like. You know what? Can you... Okay. All right. Okay. We also built a JavaScript Metro-style grid application that we did remote debugging. We also saw the DOM Explorer manipulating the live code of that. We also had and everyone's completely distracted now, so I could be
it really doesn't matter what you
about
say,
medical insurance or anything right now, and everyone will be having a great time. We saw the JavaScript Metro-style application, and finally the gratuitous, completely unnecessary final summary slide that you're seeing right now, and a few stats, obviously, because we're all geeks here. Now, this machine here, I'm sure, would be able to do a better job, but this machine over here, with just an integrated graphics processor, is managing to power just under 500,000 independently moving particles that are responding under the Chris's gentle touch, providing gravity. And you'll notice that we actually get some orbit about a point there. Exploiting the full power of the GPU in order to accelerate these particles. In fact, I would love to try and see how many particles we get on that machine over there. That's quite sad, isn't it? Anyway.
That's an excuse to have one of those, I think. Totally.
It's not sad. I want to know. Okay, the other thing is the 8th programming language, depending on your philosophy, whether you call HTML a programming language or not, it's actually HLSL, which is driving the mathematics behind these particles and pushing all of the processing onto the GPU. There is only about 2% of the processor that's actually being used to drive these particles. Everything else is on the GPU. And believe me, when this machine is running this demo, the fan is going flat out, just trying to keep the GPU under control.
Now, can they learn more about this in tomorrow's keynote?
Absolutely, they can. There's more about the 3D tools. There's more about Visual Studio, new things in Visual Studio coming in tomorrow's keynote and in the sessions thereafter. That's all we have time for today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.